My mom, she's just her computer's warming up, she said.
Oh, Kimberly Ann's joining us?
Yeah, she's just getting her computer going.
Okay. Oh boy. So I just zip out on you guys? No, oh, I see. I'm sharing my screen now. Okay. So you guys can see my screen?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with a quote here. So this is from Buckminster Fuller. Somebody shared this with me recently. I thought this was a great quote. There are three kinds of people in the world: those who are asleep, those who are stirring, and those who are awake. If you try to wake up the sleeping person, he will just mumble and go back to sleep. Hang on, I'm letting somebody in. If you wake up the stirring person, he'll wake up just long enough to curse you and then go back to sleep. Instead of trying to wake them up, if you come across someone who is asleep or stirring, what you should do is fluff their pillow, tuck them in, and kiss them on the forehead. The important joy for those who are awake is to seek each other out, connect with others who are awake, talk, sing, and celebrate together. This will create a groundswell of awareness, and this groundswell increases and spreads out. It will awaken the stirring and begin to stir those who are still sleeping. So great quote. I love the idea of it. It's important that we don't take this as some sort of arrogance. If you feel like you're awake. But I love the idea. It's sort of like the 12-step idea of attraction rather than promotion. I'm not trying to wake people up. I'm not out there trying to proselytize to anybody or convince them to listen to what I have to listen to or do what I'm doing. I just live my life, and those who are attracted to it and are, this is a great example of this. Those who are stirring are going to be attracted to what I'm doing and how I'm showing up, and they're going to ask questions about it. They're going to wonder how can I implement this kind of stuff in my life. And then we've all experienced people who are just asleep, and most of them don't want to be bothered, and that's okay. That's fine. I still live my life and do what I need to do. Let Lydia back in. But we've all experienced all these different kinds of people, and the level of awakeness varies from person to person. And again, it's just important that we don't get into arrogance and start thinking that somehow that makes me better than anybody, because that's not the idea behind this. The idea is just to and when we talk about awakening, for me, that's about recognizing my reality, because the reality that we talk about in Out of the Matrix is, we say this on Friday night, that you're unlimited. I think we say you're limitless. Okay, and so we don't really talk about too much about what that looks like directly, but when we talk about being inner directed versus outer directed, being outer directed is a limit that I place on myself. Focusing on those people outside of me and deciding that they're the cause of my happiness or my upset, I'm limiting myself, because I'm taking the power of choice away from myself. I'm limiting myself. And so the whole weekend is about removing limits, getting rid of the limits that we perceive about ourselves, and hopefully eventually we get to the limitless part. And so to me, that's the idea of waking up. And so it begins with becoming inner directed. Okay, that's sort of the first step of waking up, starting to wake up and recognize who we are. So questions or comments about any of that? And again, it's incredible. Go ahead.
I would like to actually add on to something that you've said about people who are waking up that are attracted to your energy. I also want to talk on the other side of that, on how people will want to live vicariously through you because they see that you have happiness, or that you're in tune with universe as well.
Gotcha. Yeah. So are you saying that those people who want to live vicariously, though, aren't doing it for themselves? They're trying to do it through you?
They haven't done it for themselves yet, or they won't do the work themselves. So they just surround themselves with people who have that attribute that they want, but not willing to work for.
Yes. Yeah. Then we've all experienced those kind of people, right? And another sort of subtlety in that description that Hillary's giving is, understanding things intellectually is different than incorporating these ideas in your life. In other words, living them out is different than understanding them. And there's a lot of people out there who understand stuff and learn things, but again, incorporating it in your life and living it is a lot different than that. We're going to talk a little bit about what living it looks like. Thank you, Hillary. That's a very apropos comment about the whole thing. Other thoughts from anybody? The other concept I wanted to get into along these lines is the idea of learning versus knowing. So when we think about learning, our lives have revolved around the idea of learning. And so the issue with that is, what does learning presuppose?
But you don't know.
You
Yeah.
don't know something.
Yeah, it presupposes lack, which flies in the face of being limitless, right? If I'm limitless, then there's no lack in me. There's nothing for me to learn. And so when I'm in the state of learning, I'm leaning on a part of myself that is not the limitless part of myself. I'm thinking that there's something that I don't have, something that I don't know, something that I need. But the reality is I'm limitless, so there's nothing that I need. So that's one part of learning. And if you really think about it, learning is weaved into all aspects of our experience here. Everything we do, everything we think about, it's all about learning, okay? And learning is something that we incorporate in our lives. We contemplate. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with learning. I'm not condemning learning. We contemplate, and then we attempt to use that new learning in our life, okay? And sometimes we're successful with that. So that's fine, okay? So what I want you to really realize is how ingrained learning is as an idea for us, that it's necessary, that we have to learn more. And I don't know about you, but whenever things go wrong in my life, whether it's even a disease or an experience at work or an experience at home or difficulty or struggles with someone, the first thing I think is, there's something I need to figure out. There's something I haven't figured out because something went wrong. When things go, quote, wrong in my life, I think I've got to figure something out. That's all about thinking that I have to learn something. There's something that I don't know that I need to know so that things don't go wrong again. Okay? And this process of learning also leans on the intellect. Okay? And the intellect has nothing to do with your limitless reality. Remember, when you're connecting with your inner guide, we talk about big R reality and small R reality. Big R reality is your limitless reality, okay? And remember, your inner guide is your communication device from the big R reality down to small R reality. That's how your inner guide understands that you're believing small R reality, your life here, and understands that your real life is big R reality. And so when I'm letting go of my intellect and not needing to learn, then I'm opening up the avenue for my inner guide to speak to me. When I'm caught up in my intellect thinking I need to learn something or understand something or figure something out, I'm actually blocking awareness of my inner guide. I'm not allowing that information from my big R reality to come through to me, from my limitless reality. So that's a lot. I'm going to reiterate that again. Again, learning is tied to intellect. Intellect is tied to small R reality. And when I'm caught up in my intellect and trying to figure things out, understand things, and learn things, I'm blocking the information, or not information, the awareness that my inner guide can provide me, because I'm choosing to live down here. I'm not opening myself up to that. So one of the things we need to do is stop the idea that I need to learn or figure things out, and instead lean on my inner guide to inform me, help me know myself, help me understand myself, help me wake up to my awareness of myself. And as I get into that limitless process, as I get into that information, the kind of information I get from my inner guide revolves around love. Okay? And so here it's about understanding, here it's about love. And so when you're tapped into that inner guide, then upsetting things happen to you and you get the answer back, what would love do to this? How do I extend love to this kind of a situation? And the answer will come to you in terms of what that looks like. And more often than not, when there's an upset that's going on, I'm going to erase this in a minute. When there's an upset going on, whether it's for me or someone else, peace of mind or peace is the answer. Peace is closely related to love. And this is antithetical or counterintuitive, that we shouldn't, when there's an upset going on, that we should remain in peace. And you guys have heard me tell lots of stories with my students, with my children, of upsetting things happen, and I choose to stay in my peace of mind. And you guys have all had these experiences. And when you stay in your peace of mind, you're connecting to your inner guide, you're connecting to your limitless reality, and you'll get information that helps, that doesn't necessarily make sense. And that's one of my regular experiences, is that as I tap into my inner guide and ask for information, sorry, let's let somebody in. Kimberly is there. Didn't see her. As I tap into, let's see, what was I saying? So as I tap into this peaceful side of myself, this limitless reality, the information that I get, the ideas, the thoughts, the awarenesses that I have don't necessarily make intellectual sense. You know, again, there's several stories in my book, and I've got lots of different stories that I won't get into tonight about asking for information from my inner guide or help in a situation. And the answer I get doesn't necessarily make sense intellectually, but it works out beautifully. So does that make sense to everybody? Any struggles with that? Any questions about it?
I actually have been experiencing this past few weeks. You know, like little inconveniences, they kind of like build up, and I'm like, oh, where's the lesson in this so I can learn it and freaking, you know, get over it. And I'm just like, took a breath, and, you know, my higher self is like, this is just a part of learning to continue to surrender. So it was just kind of like, oh yeah, you know, because, you know, we always work on like the bigger stuff, surrendering to the bigger stuff, and kind of like the bite-sized stuff kind of fell at the waistline, but now it's all the little bits that I'm getting to learn to also trust and let go.
Yeah, I love that, Hillary, and I love the word that Hillary just used, which is surrender. So how does surrender fit into this for anybody? Anybody who wants to throw some thoughts out about how does surrender fit into this? In other words, I'm over here, I'm on this list, I'm trying to figure things out, I'm trying to understand things, I'm applying my intellect to the process. What does surrender look like?
Surrender just means to allow your guidance to be heard. I mean, there's times when I'm really agitated and it's like, just stop and let go of the emotion that's got me all charged up and open up and see, you know, let's listen to see what the guidance is.
Yeah.
Just trying to bring peace into that emotion instead of letting your brain ping pong around. Let it relax and open and
Yeah,
receive the guidance.
I'm gonna tie these together. For Maurice is commenting the idea of surrender, which is, she's absolutely right. We want to allow the guidance. And I think it's by surrendering the idea that I need to figure things out. It's surrendering my intellect, surrendering the idea that there's something that I need to learn. And I know the vast majority of you guys, I've heard these, oops, sorry, I'm gonna let Kimberly in again. The vast majority of the people on the call tonight, and most of the folks who've done Out of the Matrix for any length of time, have had the experience of, you get frustrated and caught up in something, and once you finally let go of the need to figure it out, understand it, have it work out the way you think it should work out, things open up as Maurice was describing, and I'm able to allow the guidance to come through. Once I surrender the idea that I need to figure it out, that I need to understand it, that I need to apply more intellectual pressure to this situation or this issue. Does that make sense? Everybody's good with that?
And yeah, and I also just want to put this out there. It kind of sums up everything you've just said. I know not what is in my own best interest, and that to me, it's the ego. Like the ego and my human experience doesn't know what's best for me. So it's about surrender to be able to get to your higher being.
Yeah. And just, we've got quite a few people on the call tonight. So if you are not talking, I just ask that you mute yourself because we're getting a little bit of feedback. So just be careful about that. Other thoughts about that? That's beautifully said, Hillary. That's right. I know now what is best for me. We talk about that in the weekend quite a bit. The fact that if we're really honest with ourselves, we've had lots of things where we thought we knew it was something was going to be great for us and it turned out horribly, or we thought something was going to be horrible and it turned out great for us. So, I mean, if we're being honest, we really don't know what's best for us. So that's a great comment, Hillary. Other thoughts about this idea? So the other thoughts about this process of learning versus knowing is, learning again involves the application of information, the gathering of information, the accumulation of information. That's the word I'm going to use, is information versus knowing. And so this happens, most of this happens in our head, and we try and work our way through stuff. Now, we talked about the connection with the inner guide. The other piece is how do we get to a state of peace when we're having a struggle in life? Because we want to be able to lean on the inner guide, but sometimes we get stuck in a place where we're not at peace and we can't seem to get unpeaceful. Or I'm sorry, we can't seem to get peaceful. We can't seem to let go of the lack of peace. And so one of the places that happens is that knowing happens is in relationship. So learning happens with books, stuff, experiences that we incorporate in our life. But what I want you to know is knowing, what I'm talking about is knowing your limitless reality, getting in touch with that occurs through relationship. Okay, and so let's talk exactly about in out of the matrix part and out of the matrix verbiage, what exactly that looks like. So again, learning tends to be in our head, and it tends to be about information. It tends to be books, experiences. But again, when we're leaning on learning, we're leaning on that list we had up here earlier, the intellect, understanding things, figuring things out. Over here, when we start to know ourselves, that's what knowing is about. It's waking up. Okay, this knowing is what we talked about earlier from the quote, waking up. Okay, and waking up to our reality, knowing ourselves, and that occurs in relationships. So here's how that works in our relationships. So here I am, I've got my false belief down here, whatever that is. Let's say not good enough, NG, that's my favorite one to put up, probably because it's one of mine, okay? Not good enough is in my subconscious mind. And what do we say about where and who are the people that can help us get in touch with our not good enough belief? Starts with a V.
People who push our buttons.
Yes, the villains in our lives. That's right. So the villains in our lives are the ones who help us. So again, how are we having experiences with our villains? In relationships. In relationship with that villain. And once we have the out of the matrix technology, we understand that this button comes into conscious awareness so that I can release it through relationship. And remember, this is a false belief. This is one of the ways we limit ourselves with these false beliefs. So we talked about limiting ourselves with being outer directed. We also limit ourselves with false beliefs. And when we have people who push our buttons, those buttons come into consciousness so we can release them. And as our subconscious gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and there's less that's filling it up, we can become a more conscious person, okay? And becoming conscious is waking up. If you think about sleep and consciousness, when you're living from your subconscious, you're asleep. You're living from false beliefs, you're living from subconscious beliefs, you're asleep. And when you wake up to consciousness, you're becoming conscious or awake. Okay, so those can be interchanged, those words. So in Out of the Matrix, what we would say is, I want to know myself, and one of the ways I know myself is through my mom. We use mom as an example. Every time I talk to mom, I feel not good enough or less than, LT, less than. And so I know that that's one of the places that I experience this false belief or this limit that I've placed on myself. And so I allow my relationship with my mom, I see it not as I have to get mom to treat me well or be nice to me or help me. I'm going to use mom to wake up. I'm going to help mom's going to help me know myself, wake up and know myself. Okay. And so imagine what the difference is when I feel like on this side, I've got mom and I've got to figure out how to handle mom. I've got to figure out what I need to say to her. I got to figure out how to get her to change. I got to figure out how to shift our relationship and, flip that with the idea of no, mom is here to help me wake up. That's what she's doing when she's pushing my button, because then my button becomes conscious and then I can release that button. Okay, does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Questions, comments about it? So this is an important concept. Again, going back to learning. Learning is about your information and books, but we also use experiences in our lives to learn and understand and figure things out. And so here we're using experiences in our life to recognize the relationship I have with stuff. So we talked about mom. Can anybody tell me how we could use this with stuff, with things in our life? How can we do this with things in our life? Things, stuff, or experiences. Or let's use the word events. If Bruce were here, he would correct me. So stuff and events. How do we do this with stuff and events? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Like war and poverty and politics and religion, any subjects or material things like money, and
Sure.
comparing what you don't have with the things you do, you want to have, lack.
Yeah. So war and politics are a thing, but let's make it a little more personal. What are some ones that are closer to home that are events?
Death of a loved one,
That's the one that popped up for me. You have death. What else?
being physically abused
Yeah, abuse.
or sexually abused or mentally abused or just abused
Yeah.
by somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about, we've also got events that are loving, right? So we can learn from those as well. So, and we could come up with a list of loving experiences as well, okay? And stuff, money. So what we're saying about this is Viktor Frankl did this perfectly with abuse. So he was, as you recall, Viktor Frankl was in the
Concentration camp.
Yeah, the concentration camps in Germany, actually in Poland, I think, in World War II. And he's very clear that the Nazis were his villains, and they helped him wake up. He did this exact process. He realized that they cannot, no matter what they do, take away my reality of who I am. They cannot take that away from me. It exists. And this is the recognition. And as he watched other people dealing with the Nazis, and he watched people suffer and have a hard time, he really woke up to the fact that he doesn't have to experience it that way. He was taking control, he was taking responsibility, I guess is the better word. He was taking responsibility for his experience of these events and these people and the things that were going on around him. So that's an example of using an event, which was filled with people, obviously. So there are relationships with people going on, but he used that abusive situation to help himself wake up. He's very clear that that experience was the event that helped wake him up, that helped him see his reality and wake up from this subconscious sleep into a more conscious person. So that's a great example of someone using an event. And then how can we use stuff, Neville? Like where we're living. You're muted.
Okay, so what was that as far as using stuff?
Yeah, so stuff like our living situation.
Yeah, we have,
Give me your story about that.
which story?
About when you moved to Cleveland, where did you live?
Oh, yeah, I lived in the hood.
Yeah,
Yeah, I lived in a pretty, place I would never consciously have put myself. But yeah, it sure did bring up my, I'm a loser and not worth it deserving, that's for sure.
and what kind of stuff was going on in the neighborhood?
What kind of stuff? Well, I mean, it's the hood, people were getting killed and people breaking into houses, my house. And it's just a rough neighborhood to be in.
Yeah, and the story you've told me about that is you were very clear that fit for how you felt about yourself. You picked the neighborhood that matched up with your consciousness or your
Yeah, and that was
subconsciousness.
Yeah, that was after I lost a business and just my whole self-esteem and sense of self was just pretty low.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, it definitely felt, but it consciously, yeah, and I never chose it consciously, but yeah, it definitely fed my energy or my beingness, I guess.
Yeah, what it was doing is it was reflecting to you what was going on in your subconscious mind, right? I mean, as you can look at it now, you can look
Yeah.
back. That was an absolute reflection. The place I chose to live was in a reflection of what was going on in my subconscious mind.
Yeah, but it was so, I was not aware of it at all though when I did it. It's not like, oh,
Oh.
okay, I know I'm doing this. It
No,
wasn't until
you-
later
Yeah.
that I realized that, and that's when things shifted for me.
Yeah, that was my understanding of the way you told the stories. Later, he realized, and I think you realized that in and out of the Matrix weekend, it sort of was an aha moment where you realized that, you know, that the way I was feeling about myself got absolutely reflected in the place I chose to live. So that's a stuff experience. So the stuff in our lives reflects back to us something that's going on for us. And so I want to tell you that the people, mom, whoever they are, mom, dad, mother, brother, boss, they're reflecting things back to us. Stuff is reflecting things back to us, and events are reflecting things back to us that are living in our subconscious mind, and especially those things that are upsetting. But also, you know, when we have beautiful, wonderful people in our lives, and we're filled with people who love us and enjoy us and give us that information about ourselves, that is also reflecting what's going on in our subconscious, which is less of this stuff and more peace, love, and joy, which would be more conscious. Okay, so what I'm saying is, as I become a more conscious person and I live in more peace, love, and joy, that's going to be reflected in the stuff, events, and people in my life, because it's going to be a happier, more joyful place, my life to live in. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, sort of going back to reiterate some points, this is learning versus knowing. And one of the ways we get to knowing versus learning is realizing that I have relationships with all the things in my life. Not just people, but people, places, things, events. I have relationships with all of those. And when I can see those relationships as a reflection of what's going on for me, I can use that information to wake up. I can use that relationship and that experience to wake up. And when I wake up, again, as I empty this subconscious, and I become a more conscious person, then I can choose peace, love, and joy more easily. And when I use peace, love, and joy, P, L, and J, the Peace, Love, and Joy Network is the network that your inner guide broadcasts on. The Peace, Love, and Joy Network. And so when I empty my subconscious, which is filled with guilt and fear, bring it up into my consciousness so that I can let that stuff go, then I'm dialing more closely into the Peace, Love, and Joy Network. My inner guide can speak to me, and then I'm now using these relationships to wake up. Does that make sense to everybody? It's a lot of information. And again, it's just it's sort of a 360, not a 360, a eagle's eye view of this process that we're going through. But again, I wanted to make sure you guys realize that it is the relationships that we have with the stuff in our lives, reflecting things back to ourselves, which allows us, if we have this process in place. Now, most people, this is unfortunate, but most people who are sort of not aware of this process, or who are not in the process of waking up, use these relationships unconsciously to dig themselves further into the matrix. Okay, these beliefs get bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you're not in the process of reducing the size of these beliefs and freeing them from your subconscious mind, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And you can watch that happen for people who are stuck in the matrix. It doesn't get better, it gets worse for them over time. Okay, so one of the things you got to realize is you've got to consciously choose this process that we're describing over here. Otherwise, you default, we use that word in the weekend, you default to matrix thinking and growing these false beliefs in your mind. And you can kind of get that, right? Like when I have a not good enough belief, if you're not in this process of becoming consciously aware of it, it's going to get bigger, it's going to get worse. Okay. Does that make sense to everybody? Questions about that? Comments that trigger anything for anybody in terms of a story in your life? So let's go back to Buckminster Fuller for a second. Some of the people weren't here at the beginning. So I'm going to pull this back up and reread this quote. So there's the quote. Oh, yeah, I got you. I know people can see my screen now. Thank you. All right. There are three kinds of people in the world: those who are asleep, those who are stirring, and those who are awake. If you try to wake up the sleeping person, he will just mumble and go back to sleep. If you wake up the stirring person, he'll wake up just long enough to curse you and then go back to sleep. Instead of trying to wake them up, if you come across someone who's asleep or stirring, what you should do is fluff their pillow, tuck them in, and kiss them on the forehead. The important joy for those who are awake is to seek each other out, connect with others who are awake, talk, sing, and celebrate together. This will create a groundswell of awareness. As this groundswell increases and spreads out, it will awaken the stirring and will begin to stir those who are still sleeping. Great quote, and that's one of the side benefits of this process that we're describing up here. In other words, as you become more connected with the Peace, Love, and Joy Network, and you send your broadcast out from the Peace, Love, and Joy Network, that broadcast is going to connect with others who are broadcasting from the Peace, Love, and Joy Network as well. And you're going to connect with those people. And you can just see how that builds a certain amount of energy. And we see that in the weekends, right? When we're at the weekend, it's a phenomenal thing to be around the energy of someone who's waking up, and especially someone who's just getting the understanding of it. So when you're in the energy of someone who's doing this, taking their subconscious stuff and moving it into their conscious awareness, it's a phenomenal energy to be around. We experience that energy in the weekends as people do that. And that's one of the reasons I love doing the weekends, is because I love it when light bulbs are going off for people. And, you know, doing this teaching at the rehab on the weekends, I've watched that numerous times. This past weekend, the guy was there for 48 hours when I had my first presentation with him. And he sort of indicated that he didn't have any villains in his life. He couldn't come up with anybody that he was upset with other than himself. And after about 15 minutes of sort of prodding and probing with him, I told him he was in denial. He was in tears, acknowledging some stuff that was going on for him that he wasn't aware of before. And after the meeting, he came up to me and said, you know, how am I going to remember this? Because what he totally got, not consciously, but what he got was, this is so programmed into his subconscious mind and so programmed in terms of this is the way he operates over on this side. He wanted to know how he was going to hold on to this awareness that he had, that I took him through this process on this side and helped him get aware of some things. And he was concerned about losing that awareness. And the only way he's not going to lose that awareness, the only way for him to maintain this process of becoming more conscious, is to continue doing this over and over and over again. So I only met with the guy once in one group, so I'll see him again this weekend. And it was a great example for the entire group, what he went through. But what I'm going to emphasize with them is this process has to be a continuous process. If you stop doing this process, you default back to this process. You default back to growing the false belief for yourself. So this has to be an ongoing process. You have to kind of continue to do this. And that's why coming to Reloaded, coming to the weekends, talking to someone who's in out of the matrix when you're struggling with things is very valuable, because it helps get you back into this frame of reference, this way of thinking. So we have to continue to leverage all these experiences in our lives, all these people in our lives, all this stuff in our lives to grow our conscious awareness, or we default back to being in the matrix. And so for him, he was stuck in wanting to make sure he learned what he needed to learn. And so I'm going to go back to them this week and explain this process to them. I'm going to go through the idea and help, his name is Dave, help Dave understand that what he took in last week was because of this process. And that's what he wants to continue to do over and over and over again. You have to sort of practice it and know how to do it, and then you can put it into experiences throughout your life. So does that make sense to everybody? Questions, comments, concerns about any of that? All right, I'm gonna stop the recording, because sometimes we get a few more comments when I stop the recording.